Hello, welcome back to Blue Steel Talks. Anthony has got some questions about the difference between and why you would be in a service business versus, say, a software business.
Yeah.
Which I have some very decided opinions on.
But Dave, I've been managing right now 16 employees and 20 to 30 to 50 different clients. And let me tell you, I'm pulling my hair out. Managing all of that at the same time when each service needs to be done is not the easiest thing. And it's not easy to scale, right? For each new client, I need to hire a new employee because then the work wouldn't get done because I'm throwing too much at one. So I'm working on transitioning slowly to software, and I wish I looked more into software from the very beginning, because if you sell software, you can realistically sell as much. Yes, people will have issues, but they're not heavily relying on tech support, they're heavily relying on the software.
The first question about it is, what are you doing? I mean, what's the company doing? Because there are some things that can only be done as the service industry. I mean, for example, what you do with me, with Blue Steel Adventure and Blue Steel, can only be done as a service. There's no software that does that just because it's not a software problem. On the other hand, if you're selling software, it's a software problem. It's not a service industry. Or you can be something that provides both. And there, I mean, certainly there's plenty of very successful companies that get you in the door with software and then serve add-ons and so forth as service. So the two are not completely separate, even if you're in software. I have always preferred being an OEM, meaning I sell something that somebody else sells on the open market, and the reason is because the public is a vulgar beast. Dealing with the public is a recipe for insanity, in my opinion. Now, you're at a sort of a higher level. You're not running a restaurant and you're not selling shoes, but the public is the worst person, is the one who doesn't buy much of anything and causes all of your problems. Trust me on this. This happens. So you're more isolated. There's a second problem with the service business, and it's one that I think you're well aware of. You cannot scale a service business very easily. You need somebody providing the service to scale the service business. You can sell 2 copies of software just as easily as you can sell 1 copy of the software. It doesn't take any more people.
Yeah, and that's where we're bottlenecked right now, is like we can scale so much more because, I mean, at the end of the day, we do marketing for people, so we know how to bring more clients to ourselves.
Right.
It's just a matter of fact of like, are we going to be able to handle more clients? I mean, we're limiting to like 5 clients a month right now. Like, I can't take more than 5 clients a month, because if I do, it's not going to be quality work.
That's true, but every accounting firm in the country has thousands of accounts, and those are service industries. I mean, an accounting firm is a service industry for the most part, almost entirely a service industry. So it can be done, and they make a lot of money, except they keep going out of business, but that's another subject, or running up in jail. But but nonetheless, there are large companies. Bank of America is a service company, really. And so you can have a huge service company. You just have a lot of employees.
Yeah.
And then you have layers of employees so that you can manage it. I mean, part of your problem with managing a lot of accounts is the fact that you shouldn't be managing those accounts. You should be managing somebody who's managing those accounts, or some people who are.
Maybe my problem isn't necessarily just software, it's management.
Management is a difficult issue at all times. I do not believe that a person generally can manage more than 10 or 12 people directly. More than that, and it's just too much going on, and you never finish dealing with any one thing. And I found that, so that's when you put another layer in.
Yeah, well, and that's the issue that I'm running into right now, is like, so for example, my sales guy, I have a manager for them. He kills it. I never have to step into the salespeople. But when it comes to certain other projects, right, the person managing them, sometimes like things aren't done right, or things aren't done all the way, or clients aren't happy, and then I have to step in, right? So that's part of that. But then there are some times where I'm also kind of like, I find myself just completely taking over the project and doing everything to make sure it goes smoothly.
And that's both yeah, I understand why you're doing it, and a risk. Because we've talked before about just because you can do something better than a particular employee doesn't mean you can do everything better than all of your employees.
Yes.
You don't have enough hours in the day. But I'll give you the example, and that's Hussein. Hussein's been working with me very closely on a lot of stuff. And it's, much less headache than dealing with you. I'm not saying because you're a headache. I'm saying because you've got too much else going on.
Yeah.
And so it is certainly possible to do that at handoff partially or in whole without it causing anybody any problem. So it is possible with the service industry to do that. The main thing you should think of is not what kind of company you want to run, but what kind of company are you running? As it stands now, when you're in the media, that's a service company. When you're doing the marketing, that's a service company. Yes, you can use software in there. When you're doing an AI that is helping somebody do their marketing in their company, that's a software company, and that's different. But make sure you understand what kind of company you're running and structure it accordingly. The problems you will have with a software company are you have to find OEMs to resell your product, generally. Somebody else to sell the product. If you don't want to deal with the public, that's how you don't deal with the public. Somebody else does.
And to tie back to the title of the video, because I'm sure people here aren't like, oh, I want to, know all the problems of this and that, which actually, no, they do. They want to know the problems of service and software companies. Why do you recommend that people should do what you're doing with software companies rather than dealing with the public on their own?
It's the leverage. For me, it's always the leverage. It is so much easier to leverage a software company than it is to leverage a service company. And that's the secret. That doesn't mean that you can't do it. As I said, Bank of America and every big accounting firm in the world is a service company that's very successful at that most of the time. There's nothing wrong with that. But I'm a high-tech guy. I like developing, high-tech stuff. I'm not interested in selling things. It's not. I mean, you have to sell. Everybody has to sell. But that's not my primary driver. My primary driver is inventing. And so I've lived entirely in that world. And therefore, I am somewhat allergic to service industries. Service industries take more employees per dollar that comes in, which means lower profits. But they can be large corporations and make plenty of money. Every insurance company in the country is a service industry company, and they're the richest companies in the country.
Yeah. In
terms of total cash on hand, they have to be. So it depends on the nature of the company. Choose that first, and then choose the structure. Don't try to do it the other way around.
Yeah. So how do you structure a software company to be successful?
Besides the obvious, the departments like marketing and sales, which are separate departments, not the same one, please. Marketing and sales and engineering and manufacturing, if you are assembling the product for transshipment, finance and admin. You have the obvious departments because there you have one person, and generally at the top of each of those departments, who is handling each of those major functions and making sure that it gets done. They report up either to the CEO if it's a relatively small company or to some sort of committee that works for the CEO. And that's fine. I mean, that's what I've always used. And then within each of those departments, you structure it as is needed. So for example, finance is a service department within a software company. And it's structured like a service company. Meaning, every time there's someone's going to do an audit of this or this project or that thing like that, that's one person doing the audit. And so that looks like a service department. Engineering, I have a engineer, probably a VP of engineering, I have a software manager, and I have the software people. And if I've got more than, say, a dozen software people, I have another layer in there.
So if someone's really good at, and this is another question too, if someone's really good at like software engineering, they're like the best person you've ever talked to, how do you get them to take on like a higher position of managing other people?
Often you'd be a damn fool to do that. I have engineers that I've had work for me for 20 years that have never become a manager because they don't want to. They're superb engineers. Why on earth would I promote someone to the level of their incompetence? You know, the old Peter principle is that people tend to rise to their level of where they become incompetent. Don't.
Yeah.
I mean, if the person wants to, or if you absolutely have to in an emergency situation, sure. But an engineering manager is a lot different than an engineer.
And what's the difference?
Engineering managers like managing people. Most software engineers don't even like people. So, you know, they want to sit in their cubicle, and I mean, I'm making a joke here, but in general, the software engineers want to do software. They don't want to manage somebody doing software. And I freely admit that when I was doing software, I didn't want to manage people doing software either. And it was a bit of a pulling teeth to get me to be a manager at all.
So to get someone who manages, and I think maybe this is something that I need to understand better, to find someone who's good at managing people, or being a manager, you have to find someone who's good at managing people, not someone who's just good at what they do.
In fact, that is a common mistake that is made all too often, is you assume that somebody who's good at doing something is good at managing other people who are doing that thing. And that's a bad assumption. It depends on the field. In engineering, it's a particularly bad assumption. Mm-hmm. Because there's so many people who really want to just do the software.
Yeah.
Or the hardware.
So as a startup, would having one manager, realistically, look over everything be a stupid idea?
No. I mean, I have always had, once I had more than 2 or 3 software engineers, I have a software engineering manager. And that's different from the VP of engineering usually. I mean,
yeah.
VP of engineering is usually doing other things like helping to manage the projects that we're doing for our customers and things like that, which the software manager is not. They're just making sure that what's supposed to be done is getting done.
Yeah. So they don't necessarily have to have 100, like they don't, for example, in my industry, right? So like I do videos, I do marketing for people, I run ads. They don't need to know how to film a video or what videos need to be, like they just need to know, hey, this video needs to be done at this time, mm-hmm. These ads need to be run at this time, this video needs to be posted at this time. This is
you're
the
talking about the
client's
manager.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly right. The managers do not necessarily need to know how to do all of the tasks that come underneath them. Now, generally they do because that's how they came up. You know, just because someone's a software engineer doesn't mean they can't be a software engineering manager or want to be. Quite often, some are that way. Likewise, a person who's being a videographer may be interested in the projects that the clients are bringing in and become a manager that way, assigning the videography. Those all depend very much on the individual, and no matter how big the company is, it's always the individual that matters, and making sure that they're not cogs in a machine. They're individuals, and they're doing in the best place they can be in the company.
Yeah.
People make the mistake of thinking people are cogs. They even make that in small companies. It's not even true in big companies. It still depends on the individual and the individual's capabilities. The right engineer or the right software developer or the right marketing person or the right salesperson in the right position is worth 10 times a person who's good at something but in the wrong place.
Yeah. What if when the manager comes in, a person who's good at what they do says, oh, but the manager doesn't know anything, this is good?
That may have not happened sometime in the history of the universe where a manager came in over a software engineer and the engineer didn't think that. But I've never run into it. Everybody always thinks that. And the manager has to establish what they're good for. And that is a difficult problem because they are doing a task that the engineering guy the software guy doesn't want to do, namely managing who does what software for what company and for what thing like that. So because they don't want to do it, they don't think it's important, so they don't think the guy's important who's doing it. But they're wrong, and the fact that their paycheck keeps coming in will eventually convince them.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you, Dave. I mean, by the way, this series, I mean, these aren't just interviews. This is a series of building the business from $0
Yeah, all the pieces are intended, at least, to be there. If there are things that you want us to cover, if there are things that you have questions about in the running of a business, in the establishment of a business, in the sale of a business, put it in the comments and I will definitely address them.